thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a meaning why border exists in our society, to prevent the conflict and prevent further casualty in the society. But the border has no meaning when there is no enforcer of the border to prevent the conflict in these situations. The model we stand on in open government interest by is that those use military forces to secure the border so that we need to minimize the casualty we see in Israel, between Israel and Palestine. The further conflict which happens in those areas, which we see in the case of 2009 of the Gaza instances in these situations. So what we're going to bring you from open government today is first I'm going to tell you why there's responsibility for United States of America to send the military forces in those border lines, secure those borders. Second, I'm going to tell you why this policy will minimize the casualty inside the conflict, creating a strong deterrence in those situations. Third, my partner Tommy is going to tell you about how this will change the internal politics of the Palestine and how it is beneficial in the long run. The model we can support, we want to clarify what the will sound on the side of the house. On our model, we will go to the borders between the Palestine and the Israel, which is the appropriate number of the military in these situations. And we will defend that border from both sides of the instances. So if Israel tries to attack those US forces, US will fight back and defend the borders. And also if Palestine and Hamas try to attack those borders, also US will fight back and defend the border, ensure there are borders in these situations. No, thank you. So firstly, about closing.
So how do you deal with the problem of Jerusalem? Do you make them share or do you make Israel to dominate?
Okay, we think Jerusalem will be under negotiation. My partner is going to tell you how these negotiations will work better to solve those problems Jerusalem in these situations. Yes, sir.
Just let us go. There's Israel military in the border with the Palestine. Are you going to remove those military from there or just go right with them?
We think if we can get consent by both parties, we will remain both militaries in this situation. And if we can't get the consent from these two sides or two nations, we think US border, only this US military will go under that border. So, clarify that definition, moving on to the first argument, but responsibility and the need. We think it is more correct outside the house for military intervention in there. Firstly, in terms of humanitarian reasons why we should do so, Mr. Speaker. Because the problem of the lack of the border line is that you can freely use your forces near the borders in this situation. If there's no enforcer for you to stop those borders, you can arbitrarily claim this is our line, that's why our military can there. If the foreigner is there, we can remove them as we want. And we can create a conflict within those instances, which will involve instances life, who happen to be born in the conflict in this situation. Based on these humanitarian reasons, there has to be military forces in those situations. Because the problem in the current framework is that Palestine and Israel is claiming their own territory and fighting with each other. And citizens is involved in these instances, and they have to die in there. Okay? That's why, as a risk we democracy, who find the value in life and the health of citizens, we think they should go there. But secondly, uniquely, US has responsibility in that, Mr. Speaker. US has tried to make negotiation table between Palestine and Israel. So as we can see in the case of the Camp David by Bill Clinton, in these instances. So that there is a negotiation table between Palestine and Israel, and the US failed to ensure outcome of the negotiation and enforce that outcome in the reality. That means US has further responsibility to realize those negotiation outcomes of the negotiation table, ensure there's a peace between this country. That's why the US uniquely has more responsibility than other Western liberal democracies we see. That's why we think our policy is very clear. So let me move on to the second issue of the debate. No, thank you. About how our policy will ensure those peace in this situation. I've already established the idea how the current framework is highly likely to create a conflict in these situations. And the vast majority of the conflict which happens between Israel and Palestine is done by Israel at first in these instances. And as a consequence, Hamas and Palestine have to retaliate against those Israel attacks and create conflict. We think that's the fact. We think, given this status quo, we think our policy is the effective one to solve the problem of those cases. Firstly, we need to create massive incentive for Israel to further attack the borders in this instance. Why? Firstly, we think within those U.S. is kind of the ally of the Israel in this situation. They have economic tie with the U.S. so they can trade with them. They can ensure the economic prosperity with the nation, which they need, which is necessary for them to claim the legitimacies inside the country, for them to get the vote from the citizens inside Israel in this question. Or for example, there are other surrounding countries of Israel. There are many Arabic nations. If you lose a tie with the U.S., which will secure their own border, then there is highly likely for them to get attacked by the Arab nation. They need those ties with the U.S. to ensure that they ensure these instances. That's why if Israel try to attack the U.S., and that means it will undermine the connection between the U.S. and Israel. I think it is extremely high risk for them to say that they will accept that instances. But second, we think the U.S. military uniquely has a strong power. It's strong military power compared to other nations. They have thousands of militaries. They have a huge number of the military in this question, or they have high quality of the weapons. No, thank you. In these instances, no, thank you. That's why we think that it is extremely difficult for this Israel themselves to attack in these instances. We think that this is really good because if Israel don't attack Palestine, we think that we can remove the cause why Palestine retaliates those conflicts, those attacks from Israel in these instances. And second, we think it should also be the deterrence for those Palestine to attack because they can't win in these instances. And secondly, they will ensure their own peace, which is not ensuring the status quo. Because in a status quo, Israel has a huger power than those Palestine and intervene in these instances. And their life is being threatened, but they have massive incentive to follow that. Why this is that? But it's good. Firstly, you can say, generally, we can save the life of the citizens who are getting involved. And secondly, we can ensure this more economic prosperity, for instance, in the Palestine, because the Palestine has a huge humanitarian crisis in there. The possible reason for that is because they need to spend those military, they need to allocate those money military, or for example, even if they want to trade, there is massive conflict which is done by Israel. That means our policy will allow them, for instance, much more aid will go to those nations. They can trade with other nations, which will give them economic prosperity inside the nation. So, Mr. Speaker, we will give you the meaning of the borders in reality. That's why the motion has stand. Thank you.
I thank Prime Minister for his speech, and I invite the opposition leader from UPD.
Speaker, of course we can see that the invasion in 2009 is very severe. But we think this motion rather exacerbates the problem. Because we think the extremists in Israel or Israel public goes towards the Palestine after we take this one all the more. All the more for that, we think that after we take this one, we have to lose mediator in negotiation. Because we put America completely into the side of Israel, which is that a Palestine-Israel negotiation. First of all, I want to talk about firstly how casualty is going to be increased, and I want to talk about how negotiation table is going to be lost. First of all, rebuttal to the Prime Minister. He has said in the first argument that because America made the negotiation table and failed to ensure security of the border, America has to take responsibility. We think this reason cannot justify his assertion. Why is that? Because issue of negotiation or issue of, for example, Jerusalem is that only issue for two parties, Palestine and Israel, right? Because America is prepared for the negotiation table. This is not active, for example, participation of America. We don't see any responsibility on the part of America that is there, simply. Therefore, we think their reason cannot justify their assertion. He said, and in the status quo, retaliation is occurring after we deter, for example, Israel from attacking Palestine because the U.S. is a very important ally. We don't think that's the case. We say there's, of course, Israel autonomy in Israel. For example, that's why the Gaza invasion occurred without US permission. We think because we think after we expand, antipathy towards US, antipathy towards Palestine is going to be increased in the domestic arena with Israel. We think that's going to be rather exacerbated. So, first of all, the exacerbation of the casualties.
The reason why the Gaza invasion occurred is because there is no enforcer of the borders in this instance, and we prepared for it.
So what if you, for example, US try to force, try to prohibit Israel from doing that? We think much more casualty than expected. First of all, we say in the status quo, the model will support the opposition is Israel. Israel, as I have said in POI, Israel is, for example, protecting their border in the status quo. We think in the status quo, for example, they might be supported by America, for example, or of course America gives support to Palestine. We think America can be, America is doing those kind of things. What we said, American public opinion is not so inclined into Israel-Palestine problem in the status quo. Because actually it's not American soldiers are not killed in the status quo. Meaning that what's happening in the, for example, border between Palestine and Israel is something that is far away from them, happening far away from them. Therefore, we think, even if, for example, there might be some casualty within the border, or around the border, American public opinion are not so inclined into that. Therefore, we say that America not so interested in, for example, putting more forces into those kind of situations in the status quo. But still, we say, simply, Israeli public opinion itself is not so good in the status quo. Because even if, for example, Israel military are not oppressing, for example, Palestine as they like, as extremists like, they can feel that, for example, because military of Israel is Israeli people, because they think that Israeli military understand the feeling of Israeli people, they can be satisfied with the situation, even if, for example, even if they can, for example, those military are not oppressing Palestine as they like. But after we expand, we think, first of all, American public opinion will be inclined to the exacerbation of the conflict. Second of all, Israel public opinion. First of all, American public opinion is in the place. Because we think after we expand, we expect American soldiers to be killed by a Scud missile or Katyusha missile coming from the Gaza Strip or the West Bank. We think, therefore, because American soldiers are killed after we expand, American public opinion will incline exacerbation of the conflict. Because they are angry with the Palestine. Their hatred towards Palestine is going to increase after we expand in place. Therefore, by the cooperation, for example, with Israel lobby in America, they can, for example, force government to put much more forces into those kind of Palestine, which is the problem. Because if more forces we have there, the more exacerbation we have. Because the more scale, the bigger scale of the conflict is, the more casualty. But second, we say Israel public opinion is very severe after we expand. Why is that? Because, if, for example, this America is out of control of Israel, they feel that outsiders are doing what we don't want to do, right? Therefore, we think after we expand, for example, if, for example, they are spoiling Palestine people, or they do not oppress Palestine people, they will get angry with those kind of people. And we think, for example, Shas or Kaha, which is an extremist party in Israel, will get much more power. Why is that? Because they want to, for example, expel America and go into Palestine much more. Therefore, we think those kind of extremist parties can have power. More importantly, we say those kind of parties have self-forces or forces by themselves. Therefore, we think after we expand, first of all, the scale of the war is going to be exacerbated or bigger. Second of all, become more complicated situation with those kind of extremist forces. Second of all, negotiation. We think that's status quo. Of course, as I have said, that of course, America are supporting Israel, not only Israel, but also Palestine, by giving humanitarian aid, all those kind of things. Therefore, we think America can be neutral as possible. We don't think America is completely neutral, but we say America is not regarded as the same as Israel in the status quo in the place. That's why in the past years, for example, 1995 or 2005, we have negotiation table by mediator of America, for example, between Rabin or Arafat or Barak or Arafat, in the place. Meaning that in the status quo, even if, for example, leader of Palestine try to make negotiation table with Israel, there is not so much criticism from domestic arena of Palestine, because the Palestine people do not recognize America as completely same as Israel. But after we expand, we have to lose very important negotiator or mediator in those kind of negotiations. Why is that? Simply because firstly, people know that we were killed by America. Because America wanted to protect, for example, protect the Israel border and kill Palestine, guerrilla Palestine people or settlement of Israel. We think it's very bad. Because people know that we were killed. For example, my daughter was killed by America, or my son was killed by America. Second what we said, they see, for example, American soldiers cooperating with Israel after we expand. For example, on the street, or for example, American soldier and the Israel soldier are cooperating with each other and surrounding the settlements of Israel. We think by seeing that though Palestinian people have to recognize America as completely same as Israel, as opposed to us, so for example, we can be neutral as much as possible by giving aid to Palestine and those kind of things. Even given the existence of aid after we expand, Palestinian people have dislike America all the more. Why is so bad? We think, for example, even if America tries to make negotiation table with Palestine, between Palestine and Israel, that there is no possibility for example, leader of Palestine guerrilla Palestine government to make a negotiation table, simply because they have to lose the support if they, for example, use America. What's important here is Saudi Arabia or Turkey can't be negotiator or mediator because they're controlled by America. Without permission of America, they can make any negotiation, they can be any mediator of negotiation. By losing negotiation, we think retaliation is occurring after we expand day by day. We think with that end of 2-day war, we have to get the situation. Therefore, we're very proud to support tomorrow.
You can speak up on speech and all basic timings with the speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting to hear from the closing opposition that what we do to the negotiation, for example, regarding Jerusalem. So what I'm going to say in our third point is about how we are going to ensure the power shift to the moderate force, for example, like Hamas from Hamas, and how that will be beneficial, Mr. Speaker, in many ways. That will include, for example, where the outcome for the negotiation which they care about in their POI. So that's what I'm going to do in a substantive. But before that, let me engage with what the previous speaker said. Now, Clark talks about how, Mr. Speaker, there will be like worse outcome with regards to public opinions in the U.S. in Palestine. Well, I hope you might have noticed, but his entire case is predicated upon the one assumption that there will be an actual conflict in the after plan, Mr. Speaker. But the failure, Mr. Speaker, the problem with his case is that he failed to refute the argument about how there is strong deterrence effect. And therefore, because of this deterrence system, there will not be like much conflict in the after plan in the first place, right? And therefore, his assumption is proven to be wrong by my opponent, Mr. Speaker. His whole argument doesn't stand because it's not based upon the sound premise, Mr. Speaker. But let's look at the details of his argument. He talks about how, Mr. Speaker, first of all, there will be anti-conflict in the U.S. army because there will be death of soldiers. Mr. Speaker, first of all, this is predicated on the assumption that U.S. have to move their force actively, constantly, right? We don't think that will be the case because my opponent told you, first of all, on the point of Israel, they have strong economic ties with the U.S., right? It is no secret that Israel has received strong support from the U.S., for example, in terms of economy, Mr. Speaker, or trading with the U.S., and therefore, Mr. Speaker, we don't think they have active incentive, Mr. Speaker, to undermine the U.S., which is their supporter, Mr. Speaker. The Israel does not have active incentive to lose support, which comes from the U.S. because their lives are reliant upon the U.S. But secondly, more importantly, in terms of military stance, Israel knows that, Mr. Speaker, they will lose, Mr. Speaker, if they face the United States, which is the strongest army in the world, right? And that is why we don't think there will be a practical possibility that Israel will be involved, U.S. will be involved in conflicts, and therefore we don't think public opinion is going to get anywhere in the after plan. But secondly, with regards to public opinion in Israel, Mr. Speaker, Israel is going to see the benefits, right? Because the point here is, Mr. Speaker, the motion stipulates that you're going to secure the border, and finally, my point actually told you, we are not going to, for example, be one-sided. We are going to, Mr. Speaker, fight back both against Israel and Palestine, against not one of them, Mr. Speaker. And if there is any military, for example, instance, and that is, Mr. Speaker, if there is, for example, attack from Hamas, right now, Israel has to lose lives of their people because Hamas attacks them. But in the after plan, because there is strong deterrence on the part of Hamas, Israel will receive less attack from Hamas, and therefore Israel will see the benefit, not the harm in the after plan, and therefore there will not be, Mr. Speaker, worse outcome with regards to public opinion in Israel, and that is that his first argument doesn't stand. Moving on to his second point, he talks about how U.S. will be neutral. But again, as I clarified, and my partner defined this, Mr. Speaker, U.S. will still be neutral to the extent that they are going to both defend, Mr. Speaker. They are going to use their force both in defense of both Hamas and Palestine and Israel, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Mr. Speaker, both will see the benefits, right, Mr. Speaker, because right now, people in Palestine also killed when they, Mr. Speaker, receive fight back from Israel, right? And therefore Israel will not be able to attack Palestine, and therefore Palestine would rather like the US intervention in this manner, Mr. Speaker, because they are not invading their territory, they are rather securing it. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, both of his arguments do not stand. Moving on to Mr. Speaker, his very few rotations. He talks about how the US just didn't contribute to the conflict. But Mr. Speaker, the US it is no secret that US has failed, Mr. Speaker, to import its own import the treaty which they made with regards to Camp David, Mr. Speaker, and so forth, right? It is no secret that US is really criticized the international community, Mr. Speaker, because it fucks up, obviously, Mr. Speaker. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, even though this is not the case, Mr. Speaker, from a humanitarian perspective, we always, Mr. Speaker, make Western countries intervene with regards to, for example, the Mr. Speaker, Gulf War. And therefore, from a humanitarian perspective only, Mr. Speaker, we think if the US have the capacity to secure the people, Mr. Speaker, in both Israel and Palestine, we think that's the moral thing for the US to do, and that is why we think our proposal is principally correct. I'll take the point in closing.
So if these Israel people believe in their terms, how can you say that how do you deal with the situation that Israel is continuing destroying the treaty done by the United States?
The reason why, Mr. Speaker, in the past the treaty has been broken is because of non-military involvement, right? That's exactly what we are going to change in the after plan. So moving on to my last point, which is also important, how in the long term we are going to secure the power shift, Mr. Speaker, from Hamas to the moderate force like Fatah within Palestine, especially within Gaza, because in Gaza, Mr. Speaker, right now Hamas is quite strong in relation to other peaceful forces. Now, in the status quo, Hamas has strong support, Mr. Speaker, especially in Palestine, especially in Gaza Strip, Mr. Speaker, because people on the ground need Hamas to defend themselves from Israel, right? That is why Hamas can gain support, Mr. Speaker. For example, they can receive money from the people saying that we need to arm ourselves so that we can fight back against Israel, or they can recruit more people on the ground, Mr. Speaker, for example, in the Gaza Strip, so that they can strengthen themselves. And finally, Mr. Speaker, they can win the election as a political party because they can convince the people that, Mr. Speaker, we need to have a military force so that we can fight back against Israel effectively. That's what's happening in the status quo. So what's going to happen in the after plan? Because they are going to secure the shift to more modern actions after like Fatah, right? Because people don't need Hamas in the after plan because US will be the actor to defend Palestine. Therefore, Palestinian people don't have to rely on the Hamas to secure themselves. As a consequence, Mr. Speaker, people will have less cooperation with Hamas. For example, people will no longer pay money because they don't need to Hamas to arm themselves, or people will no longer join, Mr. Speaker, sacrifice themselves to join Hamas because they don't need to. They don't want to lose life if it is not necessary, right? And furthermore, the Hamas will be less likely to be elected as a political party. Rather, parties like Hamas will be more likely to be elected, Mr. Speaker, because they're peaceful, they don't need to fight. So, why this is important? We have two important. First of all, in terms of peace or less of conflict, Mr. Speaker, this is beneficial because Hamas is the exact actor who are making this conflict, right? First of all, Mr. Speaker, we are going to remove Hamas, Mr. Speaker, and therefore we are going to remove the large part of the conflict. But second of all, Israel don't have to fight back if there is no strong military action coming from Hamas, right? The one of the reasons why Israel is, for example, committing atrocities in some circumstances because they have to fight back against Hamas. If there is no Hamas attack in the first place, Israel don't have to fight back. For those two reasons, this is going to be peaceful. But secondly, more importantly, with regards to the POI, we are going to have better negotiations. We know that, Mr. Speaker, there's negotiation, for example, going on with regards to land swaps in Jerusalem, or for example, right to Palestinian people to visit the historic sites which exist in Israel. Those negotiations are going to be better. Why? Because in the status quo, there's no chance that negotiation is going to succeed, right? Because the reason why Israel don't come to the negotiating table, because it doesn't want to talk to Hamas. What evidence do we have? Because we know that Hamas don't even recognize Israel as a sovereign nation, right? Hamas actually says, Mr. Speaker, Israel doesn't exist in the world. That is why Israel don't want to talk to Hamas. That is a major reason why Israel refused to come to the negotiating table in the first place. And therefore, with regards to closing of the POI, rather than the status quo, there is no chance that negotiation will be effectively succeed. What's going to happen in the after plan is that we are going to have, Mr. Speaker, more modern force like Fatah to come to the negotiation. Israel will regain the incentive to come to the negotiation. And therefore, with regards to the negotiation, we are going to secure that it's going to better succeed, better chance of success. And that's why I propose all of those reasons we are extremely proud of.
Alright, thank the speaker for his speech, and I call the JPDU turn ahead.
Mr. Speaker, today's argument from opening government is all based on one assumption. After taking this proposal, deterrence power is complete. We can prevent all conflicts after taking this proposal. Based on this assumption, we oppose this argument analysis, so we oppose this motion. First, rebuttals. They say that after taking this proposal, negotiation is okay and so on, because there is, after taking this proposal, there's no conflict and so on. Thanks to deterrence, it is unrealistic. After taking this proposal, of course, conflicts happen. In this case, my partner already explained, after taking this proposal, more clear situation, lose the chance of negotiation completely. And why after taking this proposal, conflicts happens? There are many reasons. Many reasons. First, as the uniqueness of this area, there's a problem of religion. After taking this proposal, what happens? U.S. military go into those, for example, the sacred areas like Jerusalem and so on. In this case, what local people think, of course, feeling antipathy to those U.S. military or U.S. military and so on. Why is that? Because what is religion? Religion is the most important thing. They are attached to those things since they are child, and they connected with religion every day and every night. And this religion is prioritized over their own life, their own lives. For example, own lives. Because even if they lose life, it is for some people think that even if they lose life, it is for the God, they think that they are helped after they die in the heaven and so on. In this case, as a religious problem, some people prioritize religious things over their lives. That's why even under status quo, there's some problem like suicide bombing attack and so on by some people. Second, if they say that U.S. military is strong, so deterrence power is okay, and so on. But it is not true. Israel also have large power and large military and so on. And in this case, what happens? Israel can take action freely. Why is that? Because Israel or Palestine have also autonomy. For example, Israel have large and big power in the U.S. like lobby. My partner already explained the lobby's action was the economical power in the U.S. and so on. In this case, Israel free from the U.S. They can take action by making use of their own strong military. Second, U.S. under status quo. U.S. cannot send the not maximum military for other things. Why is that? Because this is the amount of military spending is decreasing in the U.S. Like they are cut away from Philippine basement and so on by the depression by the demand from citizens and so on. So the U.S. military, U.S. military, comparatively, is not so strong at all. Sadly, even if U.S. protects borders, even if they saw, the fact is not changed. The fact means that in their own territory, there is some settlement of other people, like in the Palestine territory, in the Israel territory, there is settlement of Israel, Palestine people, and so on. In this case, what happens? They think that why Israel is in my territory or why Palestine is in my territory, and so on. In this case, even if the U.S. protects borders, those people, the local people, have lose no incentive to attack this territory problem and so on.
Take one.
Thirdly, next, they said that after taking this proposal, there is no need for depending on Hamas and so on. But it is not true. Rather, after taking this proposal, this stimulates their feelings. They think that Hamas don't take any action in this case. Then they themselves have to take action to protect their own sacred areas, or their own territory, which is based on religion and so on. In this case, transfer doesn't happen, and so negotiation cannot work after taking this proposal. Rather, we lose the chance of negotiation forever, ladies and gentlemen. This is my clear logic. Yes.
Okay, if you accept that people are involved in conflicts and losing lives right now, it's going to be better in that perspective in that plan. So how should I come to that?
Okay, I explain now. First, after taking this proposal, what happens? We lose the chance of negotiation or stimulate the feelings of the local areas. In this situation, what happens? Even some conflict happens and the U.S. stops those conflicts, in the future, again, the conflicts happen and the U.S. attacks these things. This stimulates the feelings of local people. And again, conflicts happen and so on. But we cannot take negotiation, as my partner already explained, meaning the solution from the government side doesn't cut the root cause. The root cause of this problem, it is not stable solution for this problem. So they said they want to protect people's lives, peace, and so on. But rather, this is against today's government's goal. After the plan, it is against today's government's goal. In summary, there no deterrence power which cuts today's assumption of the basement of today's government side. There's only harm, so we oppose. Thank you.
First speaker for his speech, and I call the member of government from THBT US.
I'd like to ask the opening opposition one question when they talk about a solution to the root cause. Exactly what are they talking about? They're talking about negotiation, they're trying to propose negotiation. They've told you, the opening government has told you clearly why the negotiation that now does not take place without because of the United States military intervention. And more importantly, those negotiations, it is clear that in the status quo, it is boiled down to the problem of Israel and Palestine acting and reacting against each other rather than relying on negotiation anymore. So we have 4 decades of conflict between Israel and Palestine. If negotiation actually works, it will have already worked in the past before. Why did it work? How are they going to solve the problem? The opening opposition never explained to you why, and the purpose is that the opening opposition failed to fulfill its duty. All the time, trying to grasping for a solution, they are letting those conflicts continue, which includes a lot of collateral damage and a lot of civilian death. We believe that is unjustifiable, especially from the United States point of view. So looking at the opening opposition, what do we have? First of all, they talked about how it is depends whether they're going to harm America and America is going to lose support and military support is not so strong at all. But the case is, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the analysis of how American military is not so strong as well is a total misinformation, considering that the United States is the strongest military in the world right now, and also considering that it is an extension of the duty that the people entrusted on the United States, that they empower the military. The United States try to guarantee that they can solve conflicts throughout the world, or try to guarantee that the military is strong, exactly because they want to stand for the people. They want to represent the people who elected them, who trusted them to solve these human rights violations throughout the world. We still believe that this is totally in lieu with the democratic process of the United States, and therefore I don't see how the United States people will be against this form of intervention, right? So okay, the opening question says this, but this is going to victimize, this is going to harm the American soldiers in the border, who are guarding the border. Mr. Speaker, we do not see this case, especially starting from Israel. We're going to start from Israel, right? The opening government explain to you why Israel does not have any incentive to attack America, especially considering that they are relying on America, right? We like to extend this even further. We have to say that first of all, considering that America's and Israel's tie, America is almost the only sole provider of weapons to Israel. If Israel is trying to go ballistic against Americans themselves, America can stop providing the weapons towards them. Not only is it impossible, it's incentive-wise, it is also impossible power-wise for Israel to overwhelm America in the first place. So therefore, this analysis doesn't stand. Finally, from the deputy leader of opposition, they start talking about how religion is the most important thing in the world, which we believe is out of the debate because, right, exactly, that's why we are trying to be fair between Israel and Palestine. We're trying to be fair for both the Jewish people and Islam people. We're not trying to just promote Jewish propaganda and so on. We do not see why religious thing is in the debate, is in the context of today's debate forever. And finally, the opening opposition today mainly talk about victimizing Palestine. And today, as a closing down, we're going to extend about how, even according to Palestine, this is actually a good thing to combat anti-Americanism and overall way to support Palestine. Before that, I'll take a POI. Yes, or
So, even in the status quo, Palestine attacking military to Israel and high possibility to be killed because Israel military is the most strongest military in the Middle East. How can you say that those kind of people will suddenly use incentive to attack military of America?
well, very first thing, because first of all, we've seen that if we establish America's presence between the border, we do not see how those people will try to fight in war if not win. We've established to you how Americans military is superior to them. And moreover, we've also established that America is going to be neutral, unlike Israel, which is obviously going to push Israel's propaganda, or Palestine, who are obviously going to push the Palestine propaganda and using Hamas for that, right? The thing is, no, if you look at the states trying to be fair, they're not trying to, slay the borders and so on. And this is exactly the thing why there's no incentive. Moreover, the opening opposition lacks the counter-analysis to the government-based analysis, where we talk about how Palestine are being reactive to Israel's attack in the first place, right? We're going to move on to our extensions, right? The first thing, we would like to talk about why this is going to be a way for America to retribute for what is, for its support for Israel right now. So we see, yes, there's fighting the borders, there's conflicts, and there are a lot of casualties in the border, in borders which involve civilians, right? Now, taking the analysis from the opening government that Israel is usually the aggressor in this case, we believe that Israel being the aggressor is also tied with the US, and the US needs to take responsibility because we've told you how the United States provides weapons to Israel, and therefore the casualties that is caused by Israel's attacks on Palestine is also a part of the United States' responsibility. To prevent this misuse of weapons, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the United States has to intervene in the border in order to prevent Israel from employing the United States weapons and killing civilians again and again over and over. We believe that this is going to be the United States' retribution to its responsibility. And as for the Palestine side, Mr. Speaker, we believe that this act is going to convince them that yes, the United States is not solely supporting Israel. The United States is not trying to destroy us, but rather the United States is also considering that the Palestinians should not be involved in the conflict anymore. And this is going to kill the anti-Americanism that the opening opposition so pushed. We do not see why there's going to be anti-Americanism when we talk about how America is trying to fulfill its responsibility not only towards Israel or humanity, but also to Palestine, and the greatest one, the Palestine, because the Palestine, according to them, is the most victimized part, right? So we believe that this is a flawed analysis. Second extension, Mr. Speaker, is how this is going to benefit the Palestine in the first place. So the opening government gave you a general idea about how this is going to shift the power from the Hamas, for example, to a more modern power, and going to set a presence. We'd like to expand in the list a little more, but yes, for moment.
If you say America is going to be neutral after we expand, don't you think extremists in Israel, Shassu or Kaha, get radicalized because they do not recognize America as their country?
On the other hand, though, Israel's radicals all actually exist in the status quo already, and actually incite the attacks, right? But when they incite the attacks, they also incite the retaliation from Palestine, which create a war, which is a conflict border, and which convinces the Israelis to actually vote for the extremist people more and more. And we believe that this is a huge harm for Israel themselves, right? Because they are swayed into getting involved in the conflict. So exactly, yes, who cares if the radical people lose their power, lose their support from the people? Actually, we're happy about that, right? So we're going to move on to the extension about why this is going to benefit the Palestinians themselves. So we'll talk about, shift power to democrats, right? But the thing is, we'd like to talk about why the US right now is the unique actor that's going to help Palestine. Because think of it, if this conflict continues, whether or not there's going to be a negotiation that will ultimately solve the problem, right, or whether or not Hamas will actually attack Israel and expand the Palestine's border, right? The thing is, even if they manage to establish a certain border with a military assault, we believe that it's not going to help Palestine. Because that border, if that is established, is not with the consent of the United States. And the United States will not agree or consent with such establishment of border that involves the death of civilians and numerous attacks and so on. The thing is, we see that Palestine wants the United Nations membership, right? And And what is the biggest bottleneck in that? The United States veto. Why? Because the United States cannot actually recognize Palestine as a state when they're being ballistic, and moreover when the borders are not set up. So the United States is going to set a clear border between Israel and Palestine, set a peaceful border, and therefore when this peaceful border has been established, there will be no longer any problem for the United States to recognize Palestine as a state, because it established a border which America themselves acknowledge, and therefore there's no reason why America will not recognize Palestine as a state. And we believe that the benefit is clear when Palestine themselves are recognized as a state, they can democratize, they can get shaped into a better power management than status quo, and they can get various benefits from the membership of the United Nations, and therefore we believe that Palestine themselves do not have incentive to keep relying on Hamas, but rather trust the United States with this. For all these reasons, we the opposing government take this debate. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, after taking this proposal, we see two clear harms. First about what the OO has told us, losing America as a neutral actor, as a buffer in terms of negotiation. Secondly, we say, uniquely, that it is actually by taking the proposal, we would enforce on both sides to follow on the border of which America arbitrarily put, and by putting the putting the military force along the border, there is enforcement, and that will get the man of both of the actors, and we see this is what we do. The whole assumption is the government is that after taking the proposal, everybody would be happy and agree with the new border. Like the switching of which United States military is showing by putting the military. We say it's not true. We say even though under the current situation, the situation is not the most desirable situation. However, it is way better than after taking a proposal, where there is a new cause of the conflict thrown irresponsibly by the United States. We say by the United States, this arbitrary pulling the border and causing harm to both sides or the either side or whatever will actually incentivize people to fight against. And we say this would drag the lower industry, increasing the harm to the individual people more and more. So this is what we would like to do today. But because of reputation for the government base, sit down. Firstly, we clearly doubt on the feasibility. Well, as always had told us, there is this possibility is not being able to shoot against Palestine nor the Israel, because America is financially largely supported by dependent to the Israel in some kind of criteria. So we can say that there might be some kind of backdoor negotiation going on. So whether those military which was put along the border would gunfire for each individual is pretty doubtful. And secondly, we say what will happen when America, let's say, shoots the gunfire against Palestine when the Palestine is violating. When the Israel sees it, oh, America is shooting Palestine, why don't we enjoy this benefit and enjoy this chance, and they will start war because Palestine is under this serious condition. Actually, it will be the driver of the war. Why is that, Mr. Speaker? Because we say the ultimate incentive of the both two actors, both Palestine is airstrike, is to eradicate both people, to what is either factor. This is because, firstly, because they would like to dominate the sacred place, Jerusalem, and secondly, they would like to take the region of the WAD as much as possible. However, Mr. Speaker, we say under the current situation, we can control to the certain extent of this ultimate incentive, which and we wouldn't be able to control this after taking a proposal, which I will explain in my substantive. Sit down. So moving on to my argument, I want to uniquely about how border drawn by the United States are arbitrary, would be injurious and would create more harm and exacerbate the situation. So introducing the analysis of the uniqueness of each actor. So Mr. Speaker, under the current situation, even though it is not the most desirable situation, we are settling down. We see like some gather gunfire. However, there are some people who are living there, and we see some negotiation like Hamas and Fatah against Israel, and some people, some part of the Israel and Gaza, like the actual tension is getting settled down, and there is negotiation going on. However, after taking the proposal, America would put the border with the empowerment by putting the military along the border. They're putting the tanks along. And like what kind of border will it be? Like there will be two scenarios because there is something new compared to the current border. There will be two scenarios. One is that Palestinian region would decrease. Two, Israel is region would be decreasing. And in either case, we can think of like either actor kind of getting angry. Like we can think in the war station, we can think of like both actors getting angry. And Mr. Speaker, what if happened after taking a proposal? Let's see first off see the situation like where the Israeli region would be decreasing. And actually we say this will create another cause of the conflict. Why is that? Firstly, because Israel has much more power compared to the Palestinians. Like, for example, they have financial power, they have more economical power, like they have military power, they have this conscription system which is functioning really good. The second reason is that because America, like Israel has no incentive to follow America when they have this massive military power. They want their own land, they want their own sacred land. So actually, Israel wouldn't necessary for their order. Thirdly, we can think of the situation where America can really enforce this proposal to Israel. Why is that? Firstly, because America is, as I had told you, is actually financially largely dependent to Israel to a certain extent. Like there's some lobbying going on by the Israeli people in the United States, and losing this really clear harm to the United States economy. So actually, this is unlikely to happen. And secondly, we say because America does not want to carry the war or get involved in the war. We saw the mistakes which happened in the Vietnam War. The people are tired with the Iraqi war. The system would be anti-war. So actually, America cannot really stop Israel on top. Points?
Okay, the border is up to the negotiation between both parties. I told you in the status quo, as long as there's a Hamas have strong influence, the border negotiation will never succeed. Rather, in the status quo, it's going to be very easy after the plan. How do you account for that?
Well, even though the negotiation is not working, deciding the border and seeing it in the enforcement really problematic, which I would like to explain in my second argument. So, Palestine, what will happen to the Palestinians, and what will happen to the Palestinians side? Okay, the only hope, even though the situation to the Palestinians is already quite bad for these people, they still have last hope. Maybe if we continue on with this negotiation, maybe we can have the Jerusalem back, or maybe they can have the land back. So even though the ultimate incentive is to eradicate Israel completely, however, because they seek for last opportunity, for last chance, the negotiation is somehow working. They are not radicalizing too much. They accept negotiation to a certain extent. However, what will happen? Because they will lose the last choice. They will never be able to get back to their community. There is this kind of border functioning which Tony had accepted that it is never going to change because it was set by the United States and there are tank cars going along the border. So what will happen is even though the Hamas will radicalize more and more because they have nothing to lose and they have nothing to gain more. So actually they will radicalize more and more and more because damaging the Israeli side. And moreover, even though there are some moderate people there are some PLO who are quite friendly to American side, they will be dispersed and they will actually America will lose support from these people, so they will radicalize more and more. So because of this will drag the war more to the more, and actually people will get in harm and harm. So therefore, be opposed.
For his speech, and then I invite the government speaker for his debate.
thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen in this House. The unique contribution of the closing government to this debate is that opening government talk about that after taking this policy, Israel have the incentive to listen to the United States policy. And closing government, you need to talk to you. Why after taking this policy, Palestine have the incentive to listen to the this policy, and Palestine can get a better situation. This is the unique contribution of our side. Now, we have two classes in this debate. First of all, why uniquely the United States have the obligation to take this policy, and secondly, why after taking this policy, Palestine and Israel, both two countries, can get a better situation. Now, before that, let me rebut what the previous speaker has said. We believe that most of the extension is just the rebuttals to entire government bench. They just said our policy is totally lacking of the workability, but it's not true. And I'd like to rebut the argument one by one. First of all, it said because the Palestinians and Israel's incentive is to eradicate the opposite completely, and that is why even after taking this policy, the conflict won't end. But Mr. Speaker, on the other hand, they said in the status quo, negotiation is going on. So by taking this policy, negotiation will be hampered. But these two analyses, they totally contradict. Status quo is enough or not, we cannot understand. Now, also, they said that Israel is so strong than Palestine. That is why, even after taking this policy, Israel will counterattack the United States. The United States can secure a border. This is so problematic. But my partner already told you, Israel is mandatory, and also they are depending on the United States. They are getting weapons from the United States, and also my partner already told you, the United States have most biggest power in the world. That is why Israel have the clear incentive to listen to United States policy. And also said that there's no incentive because they want a sacred place. The opening opposition also said that it relates to the religious problem. But Mr. Speaker, if it's true, it's also contradicted to their analysis of the status quo negotiation is going on, and there's no necessity to take this policy. We cannot understand. And their extension is that Hamas will be radicalized. First of all, opening opposition also talked about after taking this policy, some people will be radicalized because local people see that the United States are killing the local people, or killing some Palestinians or Israel, so people will radicalize. First of all, what we can't see the difference between the opening off and closing off. And most importantly, they said Hamas, after taking this policy, Hamas have nothing to lose, so they will be radicalized. But Mr. Speaker, we cannot see why after taking this policy, Hamas suddenly have nothing to lose. There is no logic from the closing opposition. And also, Hamas radicalization of Hamas is actually occurring in the status quo. My partner clearly told you in his second extension. Now, I'd like to move on to the classes.
If this conflict happens, negotiation is conducted. Negotiation for the sake of stopping conflict, such as what we see in 2005. So how do you think it will happen if we lose
even if we accept negotiation is occurring to some extent in the status quo, my partner clearly told you because the right wing of the Israel preemptively attacked and insecure the border and lured the retaliation from the Palestine, and they can get support from the vast majority of the Israel people. And it rather widened the gap between Israel and Palestine. This is the problem we have to fix. And by this policy is the only way, by sending the military to the border and secure the border and and make impossible for both armies to invade the border and attack each other. Now, thank you. Now, moving on to the first clash. Why the United States have a unique obligation? Opening government generally talked about why United States have there is a humanitarian obligation for the United States to take this policy. And my partner clearly tells you why especially the United States have to take this policy, have the obligation to intervene into this complicated conflict. Why is that? Because, no, thank you. Why is that? Because, as my partner clearly told you, because it is the United States who sends huge amounts of money, who provide and sell huge amounts of weapons, and that kind of weapons and money are used to invade Palestine and kill Palestine. That is why we believe the United States have the obligation to intervene and stop that the genocide which is occurring between Israel and Palestine. This is and the opening opposition said that people, American citizens are not interested, no thank you, are not interested because it's too far. The conflict between Palestine and Israel is too far from the United States. But whether people in the United States are interested or not, it's totally out of debate. What we're saying is, because the United States are supporting Israel and supporting the attack, that is why the United States have the obligation to do that, so their opening up argument is out of debate. Now moving on to the second class, why after taking this policy, we can get, both countries can get a better situation. Opening opposition said that first of all, no, thank you. First of all, the Israel's extreme party will get angered and they will be radicalized. But as I already told you, it's the status quo. And also, they talked about that U.S. are also regarded as a supporter of Israel, also regarded as not the neutral existence. But Mr. Speaker, an entire government bench already told you this policy is not just supporting Israel, but supporting the both sides to stop the conflict, unnecessary conflict. That is why their second analysis is also wrong. No, thank you. And third of all, they said local people will have antipathy because after taking this policy, the United States Army sort of come in and kill the local people. This is not true. We are not saying that the United States have to kill the local people. And also, we believe that local people are killed in the status quo because they have to be involved in a conflict between Israel and Palestine. Their analysis is a status quo, and to solve that problem, we have to take this policy. Now moving on to our extension. The opening government said the United States is strong, and also the United States have an economic tie with Israel. That's why there is a huge deterrent. And closing government have a my partner uniquely said why this policy can end the conflict and can bring about the good negotiation between two parties. Why is that? Because we already told you in the status quo, Israel are preemptively attacking the Palestinians and they lure the retaliation, and because of that retaliation, the right-wing party of the Israel can get the support from the vast majority of people. They agitate the anger of Israel, moderate people, and because of that, the gap between the Israel and Palestine are widened in the status quo. But after taking this policy, the United States Army come into the border and surveilling the condition of Israeli armies and Palestine armies. So it's the United States have a biggest power in the world. That is why Israel and Palestine cannot invade and secure the border. And we can stop the unnecessary conflict between two borders, and it can weaken the right-wing party, and we can get a better condition for both countries. So we are very proud to vote.
Thank you, Speaker, for the speech. And lastly, I call the opposition Speaker, Mihail.
Ladies and gentlemen, the sense of responsibility solved nothing, Mr. Speaker. Then, moreover, we say particularly America's sense of responsibility cause only harm to the security, cause only harm to the innocent individual. The who are in the situation that try to reach the negotiation, that try to minimize the casualty, that by having more peaceful approach. So after taking this proposal, the government side totally deprived the hope and possibility of successful negotiation, and this creates only exacerbated conflict that harms the entire security of the nation. This debate just simply comes down to the issue, so which can solve this area, which can solve more people. We say closing opposition has contributed the best. Moving on to my introduction, my criteria. First of all, I'd like to talk about security and the conflict issue. Which side actually cease the conflict or exacerbate the conflict? Secondly, I'd like to talk about the issue of responsibility of the United States government. Thirdly, I'd like to talk about the we can better off the Palestine people, which can be a minor issue. So moving on to the first of all, security and conflict.
Opening government told us that they believe that deterrence works by 3 reasons. 1, there's economic tie. 2, US is strong. 3, is Israel will hear the story. Not true. First of all, we clearly told you that Israel has an incentive to prioritize their land rather than economic benefit, Mr. Speaker. Because we clearly told you the land is directly connected to their security and their sovereignty of the land. Moreover, these people have economic power from the beginning, Mr. Speaker. We say these people can just concede some economic tie, and they never ever prove to us why after taking this proposal, economic tie will suddenly decrease or suddenly disappear by just conceding some amount of harm, which is totally unrelated to the issue of the United States. So, secondly, they told us the United States is very, very strong army. Yes, we have to admit that. But first of all, we have any incentive of the United States Army to attack those areas, Mr. Speaker. Junjun has clearly told you that the United States Army have no incentive to send to use the gunfire to this area because they only lose the innocent soldiers and they only lose the budget they're spending on in the tremendous amount of money, Mr. Speaker. That Israel has in a different situation. They cannot lose any sort of land. They have to keep their land, they have to keep their sovereignty, keep their citizens using the army, Mr. Speaker. This situation, the difference of incentive totally disincentivized the United States government, United States Army to actively use the force to deter. No. And so as long as Israel will realize that the United States will no longer or will less likely to use the army towards the Israeli military, Israel will feel the moral hazard. Israel will feel they can be superior to others, Mr. Speaker. We say deterrence power won't work. Secondly, we also clearly characterize the Palestinian people in the second scenario, Mr. Speaker. When those people lose the way of negotiation, lose the hope to have the access to the Jerusalem, this is their core part of identity, Mr. Speaker. What they will do, as long as they have no hope, what they have to rely on is a radical stand, Mr. Speaker. They have to, my vast majority, we're going to support the radical organizations such as called Hamas, or that can create the terrorist attack, that can create the damage towards the United States, towards Israel, that weaken those regimes. Because there's the only way for those people to conduct this policy, they have no choice but to take this situation. And their side of the house also said U.S. support both sides. Yes, we believe so. But once the United States attacks to the one side, the other side will also capitalize on this situation in order to eradicate their others, eradicate the very, very strong enemy, Mr. Speaker. We say this just exacerbates the conflict, this just exacerbates the situation, make the citizens more and more miserable. No. Secondly, about the issue of responsibility of the United States. The government side said that these people have failed the negotiation, but it is not a unique reason to take this policy. United Nations failed, Egypt failed, Turkey failed, everybody failed in the first place. Why can you say the United States uniquely carried the burden? Secondly, closing government told us retribution. Their people are getting weaponed by the United States. First of all, they never proved to us why this policy is a unique way to reconcile this situation, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, as long as there will be harm, we should not let these people to take responsibility in those ways. You look at Vietnam, Mr. Speaker. Vietnam, the United States government tried to take the responsibility by invading the Vietnam, Mr. Speaker, but they failed. They just killed so many people on the ground. They just invaded Cambodia. They made this innocent citizen in Cambodia suffer, Mr. Speaker. Look at Iraq. The United government tried to show responsibility to the international society and invaded Iraq, but they also failed, Mr. Speaker. We say it is harmful. Closing.
You never proved how negotiation is going well in the status quo and how the situation is getting better.
We are saying that, first of all, negotiation is currently working as long as there's an option to have the ceasefire, even if temporarily, it is better. And moreover, as long as after taking this proposal, this incentivizes the citizens, incentive Palestine and Israel on the ground to create a more conflict that makes the situation more severe, we cannot let this policy go on. No. So having rebutted
is the responsibility of the government issue. Moving on to the last one, the Palestine, how we can better on Palestine. Opening government said that it is a humanitarian crisis issue. We said it's not true. There's international aid coming to this Palestine, but even though it's regulated by the Israel, but at least the minimum quality of life is ensured. Secondly, there's illegal trade by Egypt, Mr. Speaker, by having the underground tunnel. As long as there's economic situation, the Palestinian people lives are secure. Moreover, as long as it creates a huge conflict for those people, first of all, innocent Palestinian people are more likely to involve into the conflict, or more likely involved. They're conscripted or they're voluntarily go to the army to be a suicide bomber, Mr. Speaker. Or these people would like to join the Hamas or to join the radical action, just deteriorate these people's quality of life, just deprive these people's hope to have a peaceful negotiation. Moreover, opening up this has clearly told you, after taking this proposal, these Middle East lose the mediator that can work in the status quo, the negotiation will likely to fail. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, while closing oppositions draw, the consequence is quite severe, and we believe even though status quo is not very idealistic, we say it's far better, that's why we shouldn't take this policy.